Hello, parents. Welcome to our hopefully short video on Polyvagal Theory 101. So we're talking about stress, burnout, overwhelm during the holiday season in our parent group. So I wanted to give you the short video on what polyvagal theory is, why we're learning about it, and why it's helpful to understand this theory when we are learning about our nervous system and why we go into overwhelm and what we can also do to help prevent that overwhelm. So we're going to talk about our different states. There are three main states that we go into. We talked a little bit about this on one of our other training videos, but we're going to go into it a little bit more in depth. Hopefully, I'm going to try to stick to my notes so it won't be too long. I get very passionate about this topic because once you understand this, it starts to kind of help connect all these dots that you may know about already or that you already may be feeling in your body. But when you understand what the theory is behind it and why this is happening to you, then it's much easier to then make a change because you actually know what's going on. So let's get straight into what polyvagal theory is centered around, which is the understanding of the nervous system and how the vagus nerve affects our body and all our major functions. And pretty much all of our both physical and mental health is connected to our vagus nerve function. So our vagus nerve is the body's longest nerve in our nervous system. It starts at the base of the brain and it splits into two on the right and left sides of the neck. And it runs through every major organ in our body, as you can see in the picture. Now, it's responsible for regulating many of our unconscious body functions like heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, breathing, sweating, immune response, lots of other smaller functions as well. And because you see it runs all the way from our brain all the way down and ends in our gut, you can see how big this nerve or this bundle of nerves is. So vagus actually comes from the Latin word meaning to wander, like a vagabond or a vagrant means that, someone who wanders around. Now, this nerve wanders back and forth in our abdominal trunk and it ends in our gut. It doesn't go down into our legs. So that's why the majority of our major organs, it's all within our trunk or our abdomen, and our vagus nerve connects to each one. Now, the reason that science now understands that our gut is what we refer to as our second brain is because of its connection to our vagus nerve. We're seeing so many new products coming out, probiotics and prebiotics and all of these things that are claiming to heal your gut biome. Your gut biome is your not the chemicals, the bacteria that lives inside our gut, both the healthy and the unhealthy. So having a healthy gut biome is connected to a well-functioning vagus nerve, as science has proven that now our gut produces 50 to 95% of our body's neurotransmitters, like serotonin and dopamine, which is responsible for our mood. Unfortunately, with our modern diet, we have highly processed foods, we have sugary foods, we have very low fiber foods, we have foods that our body doesn't take very long to digest because we blend them up, or they're already highly processed, so our body isn't actually processing them the way that it used to thousands of years ago. So hundreds of scientific studies have shown a direct connection between our vagal nerve tone, or how well our vagus nerve is working, and every single branch of physical and mental health. There is a study, I think a meta-analysis of a bunch of different studies that showed that almost every single branch of physical and mental health works in some way connected to our vagal nerve tone. Our vagal nerve tone is simply how well our vagus nerve is working. So because the nerves fire, right, and they send messages from our brain to our body and our body to our brain, that is showing how well it's working. So when our vagus nerve or our vagal tone isn't very good, the messages don't run very efficiently. This is when we have things like MS, multiple sclerosis, or other kinds of diseases that affect our nervous system, right? That's when you often have it shows you have low vagal tone. So this is why we talk about polyvagal theory, and you're starting to probably notice these things if you follow people like the holistic psychologist or other health gurus or anything like that. They're starting to talk a lot about the nervous system because Dr. Stephen Porges, who talked about polyvagal theory, who discovered it, knew about this probably 20, 30 years ago, but mainstream media hasn't caught on until much more recently. And now people are realizing the importance of the vagus nerve on our mental health. So when we understand how the vagus nerve works and how our nervous system works, it's foundational to improving both physical and mental health. So you've probably seen a lot of new trends coming out, maybe some old ones because we're talking about yoga here. This has been going on for thousands of years, but we're talking about mainstream media here catching on to some of these trends that claim to improve vagus nerve function. And these are things like having ice baths. Probably a lot of you have seen these trends on social media. People who have ice baths, people who are doing tapping, EFT, emotional freedom technique, deep breathing, meditation, yoga, and even taking probiotics that support gut health. All of that is directly correlated to how well our vagus nerve works. And if it's not working well, it's supposed to help improve its function. So next we're going to talk about the polyvagal ladder. So I talked about this on another training, but we are going to go very briefly into these three separate states that we are often in throughout our days. So first we have our ventral vagal zone, our ventral state. And Dr. Stephen Porges talks about this as being a safe and a social state. So if you can give it a face or a representation, it's often referred to as a puppy. Somebody who is curious, full of energy, they're very social. You want to connect with others when you're in this state. Next, we're going to talk about the sympathetic state. Now, our sympathetic state or our sympathetic nervous system is responsible for our flight and our fight response, right? This is characterized by stress, anxiety, anger, anything like that, any of those big kind of emotions, you are in a sympathetic state. And finally, we have our dorsal state, our dorsal vagal complex. Now, our dorsal complex is also another parasympathetic state, right? We have our ventral, but we also have our dorsal, which are complete opposites of the spectrum. And confusingly, they are both a parasympathetic state, right? Our parasympathetic nervous system is firing. Now, the difference between the two is that when we're in a dorsal state or a shutdown state, we often feel depressed. We feel there's no hope. We feel trapped. Any of these very kind of what we call immobilizing emotions prove that we are in a dorsal state, which is a shutdown and a dissociated state. If you tend to dissociate a lot, you tend to space out or zone out, and you're kind of feeling a bit stuck or frozen, most likely you are in a dorsal state. So we talk about this as being a ladder. So at the top of the ladder, which is our green state or our ventral state, we talk about that as being at the top of the polyvagal ladder. Then we're going to go further down. When we drop further down, we go into our sympathetic state, which is our stress, fight or flight, or angry, very activated, right? If you think about it as an animal, think about it as a tiger that's angry, the tiger that is threatened. Right? And finally, our dorsal or our shutdown state, a red state, we think about that as an animal that is frozen, like an opossum or a deer in the headlights. So we're going to talk about why and what makes us go into each of these states in our next slide. So like most things, of course, we would like to be able to stay in a green or a ventral state for most of our lives, most of our days, right? But we're human beings and our nervous system is designed to move us through the various states. So the goal is not to always aim to be in a regulated or a ventral state, right? As much as we would like to, that's not how life works. Our goal here is to be able to move up and down the polyvagal ladder with ease and not stay stuck in a sympathetic or a dorsal state for too long, right? We will automatically move out of our green or our ventral state without even trying. Just when things happen, when things stress us out, we are going to move out of there. No matter how zen and calm we try to stay, when life happens, modern day life happens, we are going to automatically move into yellow or move into red. And so the goal is to try to not stay in a yellow or a red state for too long, because we'll talk about what happens when we do stay in these states. So, one of the big pieces of information that I learned to do with polyvagal theory and why we tend to move out of our green state into our yellow or our red state is to do with a word called allostatic load. So, allostatic load is the accumulation or buildup of stress responses in the body from outside stressors. Now, remember, we talk about a little bit about this in our 5-day course about how we have outside stressors. I talk about it in a water dispenser analogy, right? The stressors from outside, the things that happen to us, cause our water level or our stress level to build up. In polyvagal theory, we call this allostatic load. So we're going to break allostatic load or stressors down into 3 different categories. Number 1, we have our physiological load, which is to do with our body or somatic responses, right? And when I talk about somatic, we're talking to do with the body, right? These look like gut disorders, autoimmune diseases, chronic pain, high blood pressure, heart disease. Any of those are our body's response to allostatic load or stress. Then we have a psychological load, which is our brain or our cognitive response, right? Again, if I say cognitive, you know this is to do with your thoughts or your brain. So those things would look like mood disorders. If you have brain or memory disorders, anything to do with attention deficit disorders, ADHD, ODD, any of those are all our psychological or brain disorders. We also have sleep issues, which a lot of people have, right? And so when we look at why we have some of these sleep issues, it's usually because our allostatic load is too high. And finally, we're going to talk about our emotional load, which is our emotional responses, right? Feelings wheel, all of those emotions that are on there, that's our emotional response to whatever's happening. So things like having anxiety, depression, rage, any kind of major emotional dysregulation is going to be our emotional load. Now, it's different for different people. Again, we talked about in our 5-day course, some people are genetically better able to handle stressors than others. It depends on how safe and nurturing your environment was as a baby and a young child. And this is why I do work with kids, because it starts from a very young age. It actually, scientists have proven that it begins in utero, before we're even born. Our mother's handling of stress and our mother's allostatic load can affect how the baby's nervous system is wired. So you can see that if you are born a highly anxious baby, maybe you cried a lot, it's very possible that your mother was very highly stressed in her pregnancy and she passed those cortisol and all those neurochemicals onto you in utero. And this is why we start doing this so early. This is why it's important for us to realize we don't want to wait till we're adults to work on these things. We want to start with children, and children as young as possible, right? We can start these things if you have a pregnant mother or even your own child who's grown and is pregnant. We want to also give them this information because it can dramatically change how their babies grow up and how their babies are wired for stress. So regulated nervous systems can handle and offload more stress in a healthy way without getting overloaded, right? So some of it is to do with why we talk about nature and nurture, right? Some of it is how we're born, how we're wired. Some of it is to do with how we grow up. Now, the good thing is that the brain and the body are what we call neuroplastic. So they're able to rewire and change at any age. It just takes work, right? So that there is hope there. No matter how you were born and how you grew up and what environment, you can do the work to rewire your nervous system. So if you have better vagal tone, you will be able to offload and handle stress in a better, more effective way. And so the reason we talk about why we want to move out of our yellow and our red state and not stay stuck in them is because when we stay stuck in them for too long, our brain and our nervous system wires to feel those emotions and to feel that as normal, right? Our body will rewire because that is the state we're in most of the time. And so it thinks, okay, this is the environment I need to live in. Therefore, I need to wire this way so I can function, right? So when we automatically can rewire our systems to feel safe and social, right? And this is where we can change our environments. This is where we do the action steps, right? To create an environment that does allow us to stay in green or to move back into green. But that is for another step. This is just talking about allostatic load and why we drop into them. So a helpful thing to remember is we have the green, yellow, and red, right? Green is safe. Yellow is any kind of activated emotion, angry, stressed, anxious. And finally, our red state is depressed, no energy, and burnt out, right? So as our allostatic load increases, we move down the polyvagal ladder. So if we put it as a number, if we are at a 0 or a 1, we are probably in a green. Say we are carrying 1 box or 2 boxes. When we start carrying 3 or 4 or 5 boxes, we're going to move into the yellow, right? Our allostatic load gets heavier. We are going to drop down the ladder into, this is when I start getting stressed out. This is when I get angry, right? And then when we are carrying 10 boxes, way too much for us, our body realizes that it can't handle it. So it drops down to actually conserve your energy, and it drops you down into a burnt out, no energy and depressed state, right? If you look at it, if your body's actually doing its job to conserve our energy, right? And that is why you often feel like you don't have enough energy if what you have to take on is too much for your nervous system. And so we talk about how states become traits. If we stay stuck in stressed and anxious or burnt out and no energy for too long, our body, our brain will rewire, our nervous system will rewire to make that state that we're in the norm. And so this is where you find yourself being in yellow a lot of the time, because that becomes what our body is used to, right? If we stay stuck and depressed and burnt out for a long period of time, our body will automatically go into that much faster, right? You think about how brain patterns and neurons are created. Think of it as a road, right? And so the more we walk on this road, think about like as a forest and long grass. The more we go on this path, the more the grass is pressed down, and the clearer the road becomes, and the easier it is for people to go back and forth on this road. So what we want to do is create a new road that gets us back into our green state, right? Make sure that road is easy to travel rather than the yellow or the red. So the goal of all of this learning is to learn how to spot the symptoms of burnout in your body, right? We're going to talk about this the next couple days and over the next week as well, spotting the symptoms of burnout in your body sooner than you've done in the past, right? And this means we need to tune into our emotions, right? What we're feeling, the emotion, the anxiety, the anger, the sadness, the fear, all of those emotions, and also the body sensations, not in our stomach, the tight chest, the headaches. And all of those are going to tell us when we're in an overwhelmed state, when we're in a yellow, and when we're headed into a shutdown state or the red. And learning to use tools and things like setting boundaries. Yes, we do all the breathing and the moving our body and all those things, but also using very powerful tools as like setting boundaries to allow our nervous system to move back into the green state or the safe and social state, right? It's not trying to stay in any one of these states, it's really developing flexibility, learning how to surf your nervous system so you can move between states easier and faster. So 20 minutes long. I know I said this was going to be short. This is actually short for me. I hope that this was helpful for you to start to understand your nervous system and what the three states are and what causes us to go into them. And in the following couple days and over next week, we're going to talk about more tools that we can use now that you're aware of what's going on in your body to start to notice and recognize. And then once we notice and recognize, we are going to use tools to help us move out of the red or yellow states back into green. All right. Thank you for listening, and I will speak to you soon.